to our final panel for this spring 2021, Burned and Bruised, How to Rebuild as Digital Community Builders in Higher Ed. I am so excited that you are joining us either live or in a replay recording. My name is Josie Alquist. I'm logging in from a May Gray, LA, with some panelists that I shared earlier. I would move to their cities in a heartbeat, but also probably work with them all too, because they're going to give you all kinds of, not just where they live, but perspectives of what life has been like for them this last year, but also ways that we can unpack and problem solve some of the burnout, some of the wellness concerns, as well as thinking about what ifs for the future as we think about, I think, some important conversations that need to be had in this community and throughout higher education. So again, my name is Josie. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a consultant speaker doing work around digital community building, leadership, and digital engagement. And one of my favorite things to do, though, is to feature and find other people to expand the sandbox and to explore all these issues with. So I am very excited to be joined by some amazing panelists that can be found on all different types of positions throughout the campus, from marketing and student affairs and IT and academic affairs and diversity initiatives. So I hope we can have a holistic conversation from what we are seeing in the industry as well as our campuses. So in order to have y'all meet these fabulous panelists, I would love, as a way of introductions, let us know who you are, where you're logging in from, all that good stuff. But let us know one moment, strategy, or program that you are especially proud of from this spring, because there's been a lot of hard work done out there that sometimes doesn't completely get shined the light on. And so why don't we start who's next to me, and that is Kimberly.
Thanks so much, Josie. Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberlee Stern. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Director of Social and Digital Media at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. Fort Collins is about an hour north of Denver, and today it's beautiful. It's going to be about 80 degrees here in sunny Colorado, and it's also the last day of classes for Colorado State. So we are celebrating. We made it to the end. We just have to get through finals, but I'm confident we'll end on a high note. As a project that I'm particularly proud of this spring, of course, March 2021 was the anniversary of the global pandemic in terms of how the world had to transition to a virtual environment. So in March of 2020, of course, Colorado State University, among many, all institutions, transitioned to online course delivery. And to recognize that we've lived in a year of the pandemic, my team put together 365 photos representing every single day from the past year and put it into a video. And it was just so compelling. Every second, every moment just evoked a different emotion, from pain, from exhaustion, to real sense of triumph and resilience of our community. And so it was really a project that I'm proud of, and it's just even historical bookmark of what this past year has meant to our community, and also really championing the resilience of our community. It's just extraordinary.
Oh, resiliency, I'm sure will come up often. And yes, what a historic timepiece to have captured as we think about this historic time. Great to have you here, Kimberly. Joe.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Savado. I go by he, him, his. I'm the Associate CIO for Student Affairs at UC Santa Barbara. Actually, I'm logging in probably 30 minutes north of Santa Barbara in a place called Buellton in Solvang. It's a really nice place to visit if you're able to come up here. Just like Kimberly said, I think I am so proud of the resilience of our community at UC Santa Barbara. And so what I'm about to say is not just about the spring quarter, but just how we as a community have come together throughout this pandemic and particularly, all the way from the higher, the administration, all the way to the frontline folks. And so, we're a very tight community. And I particularly want to give a shout out to our IT community, because oftentimes, we do a lot of behind the scenes work. And from the beginning, when the pandemic started, we had to pivot right away to get our community doing, teaching, learning, student service online, research online. So I'm very proud of the work that IT staff do, particularly with our team here. We've been pretty much big part of the vaccination, the COVID-19 vaccination, testing, contact tracing activities throughout the whole year. And so oftentimes we're at the mercy of the virus. And so we have to react right away. We have to react to federal laws, state laws, the university laws. And so I'm just really, really proud of the resiliency and adaptability, and basically just, people coming together and just helping each other out.
IT pros are definitely need to be high on the list of when you can hug safely with permission. Give them a hug or a high five, always, but unsung heroes there for sure. John, welcome.
Thanks, Josie. Hello, everyone. Glad to be with you today. I'm John McBride. I work at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, just a state and a couple mountain ranges away from Kimberly. Similar day here, Kimberly. Beautiful spring green mountains. Well, we have them. I think we're a little more deserty, though. Our mountains turn brown and gross pretty quick. So we're enjoying the spring. So I started this role mid-pandemic, which has been interesting. I don't know if I said what my role is. Associate Athletic Director for Communications and Media Strategy. Previous to that, I worked 8 years in Central Communications here in University Communications. It's been a wild ride and an adventure in an athletic season that's been unlike anything we've ever seen before. Any athletic season would have been something unlike I've seen before in this new role. So we learned a ton. Seasons are finally winding down. Our volleyball team plays for the national championship on Saturday. Lots of exciting things. But I think the project I'm most excited about right now, and which is a little future facing, those of you who follow athletics closely might be familiar with the name, image, and likeness legislation that the NCAA is looking at, which will allow student athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness and make some money. This is going to be a game changer in college athletics. I believe it's going to be a game changer in our university communities as well, and what these student athletes can bring to our communities, how they'll build personal brands that we can leverage. So the part of this that I'm really excited about, I'm actually working with 2 communications professors to create a personal branding and social media management class in the School of Communications for student athletes to take to help them build their own brands and also figure out a host of compliance issues and nitty-gritty details that we're going to need to educate our student athletes on with this legislation. But it's super exciting. I think it's going to build community in some really unique ways if we can leverage these partnerships strategically. So I'm super excited for that after, as Kimberly and Joe said, just a long period of resilience. It feels like we're equipped to move forward in some exciting ways here.
Awesome. It's been cool to watch your transition while challenging mid-pandemic, but wonderful to get that athletics perspective as well. Tricia, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And good morning, everybody. My name is Trisha Brand, she, her pronouns. I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer for Portland Community College. So I am joining everybody from Portland, Oregon. We get about 4 seasons a day this time of year. So right now it's sunny. It will later probably be gray and maybe rainy, and it's going to be cold at some point today. And I think I'm representing community college in this conversation, and also, of course, representing some equity initiatives. I do want to talk a little bit about, in terms of responding to the question, Josie, something that we're doing this spring that I feel really honored to be helping to lead as our institutional equity person. We have been supporting conversations through Q&A panels all year long during pandemic. Portland Community College was one of the few colleges in the state that really decided to primarily focus on staying fairly cautious in terms of bringing students back and our community back, primarily because we serve a district that's almost the size of the state of Rhode Island, over 60,000 students representing several counties in the state. And it just felt like that, for us, we were trying to create a standard of care that would allow for us to figure out the best approach to reentry, particularly when you're talking about community college students where there's so many other things that they are navigating and trying to just kind of support their families and continue to support a lot of their basic needs. So we wanted to be very flexible and also be very cautious in terms of return. But we are preparing for some kind of reentry. We've already started a few classes this past spring, and we're starting some classes in the summer, and we'll continue to expand in the fall. And we create these panel discussions where anyone in our community can be a part of Q&As and find out what's the plan for the college. And I've been given the platform to start talking about what we're calling the preferred future of learning and work at PCC. And so it's really related to what have we learned, of course, during this past year in the pandemic. And how can we ensure that as we return, we come back more inclusive, we come back more trauma and health aware, we come back with a much greater understanding around the diverse needs of our students, and we also figure out how we create a higher standard of care for everybody. So I'm really excited about where that conversation is going to go. We've had one panel so far, and we've got 2 more scheduled, and so those have been really, really fantastic conversations.
Yeah, using the momentum of the lessons learned in future focused, not just hopeful redefinitions, but let's actually make some very significant change. And I also acknowledge the use of the word trauma this year, both at work, at home, and everything in between. There's been trauma, but we've also mentioned the word resiliency. Another word I've noticed leaders using a lot is grace, both to oneself as well as to the team, and so on. And so before we get back talking macro about the industry, because I see each of you as leaders in different ways throughout the industry, but also on your campuses and managing teams, we, throughout this year or throughout our careers, we have probably felt some burnout, maybe more than others. So for you, what have been early signs that okay, I'm about to hit that wall? And how maybe have you combated it in tactics that have worked, or maybe something that hasn't worked that you could also share that lesson for those that are tuning in? And whoever unmutes themselves first gets to go.
I did
Tricia.
it. I did it. Okay. So, I really appreciate not only the question, Josie, but I think that last little piece of, even sharing what doesn't work, I think is really important. I think given what we have chosen as our careers and how we've chosen to kind of serve and lead, one of the things that I've learned in terms of when I know I'm getting close to burnout is I already don't sleep a ton because we all have so many things going on, right? And we're trying to kind of balance the needs of our campuses, all of our other needs in our community, including our engagement with our family, our friends, our community. So I was already not sleeping a ton. When I am hitting that wall, though, even when I'm tired, I'm not sleeping well. And I know that that is one of those symptoms of okay, something is not preparing me to figure out how I'm going to comfortably rest. What doesn't work is to try to just push through. It is really important to acknowledge that and start to create ways in which you shape and reshape your practices, your habits, and honestly, even expectations in your community so that you can take that break. I will mention, I think that being remote for as long as I've been remote, one of the benefits of that has been the opportunity to occasionally, again, work from anywhere. Take the laptop, take the cell phone. Don't overcommit in that way, but at least have a change of scenery. Decide that there will be 3 or 4 half days of work as opposed to full days of work, and create a little bit of distinction between home and work, as opposed to feeling as if you are constantly on 24/7. I think that is really important. I know someone mentioned to me once this idea that, are we working from home or sleeping at work? Maybe you all have also heard that before. And I think that latter piece, like feeling like you're sleeping at work, is no good. So I definitely feel like you can't push through it. You have to acknowledge it. You have to communicate around that. And where you have the opportunity to still have some flexibility, work from anywhere, change your scenery, think about ways to actually take in some other parts of your community and nature to support yourself during that time.
I'll jump in here to follow up on that, Tricia. That I really appreciate your insight, and thank you for sharing your experience. When the pandemic first hit, I work in the social comms digital space, and there was so much pressure to get a ton of critical information out super quickly. And for those working in the comms space and digital space, it's not as easy as just tweeting, right? Everything has to be optimized. Different platforms require different ways in which we use assets to communicate important information on behalf of the university. So for me, like, signs of burnout were when the adrenaline kind of came down, and it was like, whoa, what just happened to me? Like, I was in this warp speed zone for many, many months. And so when I finally came down from that, I realized one thing that was important to me pre-pandemic was carving out time to work out. And that was a space for me of how I practice self-care. And early in the pandemic, of course, when the gyms were closed, I couldn't do my normal routine as I had set out before. And so I kind of got into like a really space where it was unhealthy for me to both physically and mentally, because I wasn't able to execute upon ways that I've taken care of myself in the past. But since then, I've learned in this pandemic that it's really important to advocate for yourself to yourself. So even if like, oh, I got to put me somewhere, I got to figure out where I am in my own life and how can I carve out 30 minutes, an hour to do something that's going to recenter, refresh, and refocus myself. And while I have a phenomenally supportive team, supportive husband, supportive VP, it's also up to me to make it happen for me, right? Because my 4-year-old's not going to come in here and say, "Hey, Mom, have you gotten your 30-minute workout in yet today?" So, but I have to have ownership over that, and if that's a priority for me to do that. So I've felt some great relief, and also just like reclaiming how I can best take care of myself given these circumstances. And then just fair warning, I do have a 4-year-old running around, so he might make an appearance here today. So.
We welcome that. That self-advocacy, I've worked on my own for a very long time, and really having to hold yourself to those own accounts. I also had the opposite though, when I was working out too much and doing things I had no business doing. I went too far and threw out my back. So know your limits too, right? Know
your limits, yes, gotta know them. And you know what, Josie, I think I saw that you're into indoor cycling. And I got into indoor cycling too during the pandemic because my normal routines were off. So it's like, finding new ways, right? Like I totally found a new path that I wouldn't have otherwise traveled. So
yep,
it's been great.
Yeah, I will try my best not to bring up my Peloton fandom. It's getting inappropriate how often it comes up.
I'd love to chime in as well. I do have Peloton as well. So I see Josie forming the group on Facebook. So that's become one of my strategy, for working out. But to me, it took me about 3 or 4 months to realize how fatigued I was, with the Zoom fatigue and just, the uncertainty of how long this pandemic is going to be I knew it was getting to me, and it took me a while to get my bearing. But since I think maybe November, December, I found 3 ways to kind of combat the burnout. One is just setting the boundary, I think, and this is something that my partner and I we're talking about this last night, and said, Joe, you develop the habit when you're getting your MBA, and working full time, and just, the habit we built in the organization of setting boundaries of, for example, I even have a tool called Boomerang. And sometimes if you email me, you'll say, today I'm taking a personal day off, so I won't respond to your email. And so that's the kind of like explicit boundaries that I've set. And I think that's kind of permeated throughout the organization, not working on weekends if possible. Second thing is reframing the work that I do. Because again, it was the uncertainty, the bureaucracy, all the things that just really gets us fatigued. I've come to 3 thoughts that's helped me out. Every time I do something, one is, am I growing? I'm a learner, and by habit, I'm a lifelong learner. Am I growing? Am I serving others? And the third one is, I'm not tied to the outcome. There's just so much variables that we can't control. And so, yes, I'm going through the process. I know what the goals are, but I'm not, as I say, I'm not playing the game before the game is played, right? So because there's a lot of things that could happen. And then the last piece is just knowing that burnout has to do with energy, right? Managing the energy, not so much time, but energy. So I build in my energizer moments. And Tricia and Josie knows how much I love working with students. So building this time in, like having those one-on-ones with students, in the evenings, or those biweekly NUF sessions, the NASPA undergraduate fellowship program. And those are my energizer moments. So I always try to build in those times to get my energy up. And of course, one of the silver linings here with the pandemic is my partner and I both work for UCSB, and now we get to spend a lot more time together. And so it's fun,
Yeah, know what brings you energy, and getting that access for you, for students. It's a great button to push. John.
Yeah, I'll share just a couple things real quick. I think all of you have shared incredibly insightful insights here. Joe, I love what you said about energy. A really interesting part of this for me, and I kind of felt bad about this, I think, at the beginning of the pandemic, as like a pretty classic introvert in a lot of ways, who, like, being around a lot of people too much can drain my energy. I actually found myself having a lot of energy and maybe not thriving early on, but at least like really liking the work from home atmosphere and the flexibility and able to do those things. But there was still a lot of difficulty. And I think what really helped me early on, and that has taught me some lessons moving forward. Some of you might have seen the Harvard Business Review piece that was going around, talking about what we were feeling at the beginning of the pandemic, especially, was actually grief. And naming it as grief is really powerful. We were grieving something that was lost, a lot of things that were lost because of the pandemic, but naming that and kind of going through the stages of grief was really helpful. And I think that's helped shape a few attitudes and perspectives moving forward. The other thing that I'll share, and Kimberly, with a 4-year-old, you would probably understand this as a fellow parent, but a coworker of mine early on talked about his strategy, which he pulled from advice that's often given to new mothers, which is sleep when the baby sleeps, right? Like a lot of new parents think, oh, the baby's asleep, I'm going to try to get all these things done. But like, that's when you need to get your rest. And if you don't rest during that same time, then when the baby wakes up, you're going to be drained. I've tried to approach work that way as much as I can, especially working in social media and communications. On those days when we have those really important messages that go out and we need to be responsive, certainly that's maybe an 8 to 7 or 8 or 9 type day. But on those days when we don't have institutional messages going out, we do have some flexibility. Give yourself some grace and take a couple hours off if you can, and sleep when that baby sleeps. That's been super nice for me, and I know we don't all have that luxury all the time, but being intentional with that, maybe carving out time on our schedules, taking that actual vacation time. Does anyone in higher ed actually use all of their vacation time? I hope other people do. I know that's a problem here. But using that vacation time, giving yourself grace, giving yourself time, and sleeping when that baby sleeps.
We're always serving up those tweetable t-shirt quotes, John. Redefining what is work, when is work. I will be hopeful how that is something, no matter where we're logging in from, we can redefine together. But many times, the make or break to some of those ways that we work and or we're supported come down to supervisors. It's not the complete make or break, but they can sure be a firefighter for you or fan the flame. So each of you are supervisors, managers, leaders in some way to students, full-time staff, part-time grads, the list goes on. And of course, you've had your own experiences. And I've been thinking a lot, as well as seeing a lot in the digital space throughout this pandemic. The difference in expectations or support levels that different people are receiving from supervisors are so vast. And there's no like one way to manage people, right? But we have seen some probably concerning ways of supervising that have probably made things a little bit harder for individuals. So as we think about knowing our own energy levels and taking care of ourselves, what might you impart, especially for those that are supervisors, what you have learned or what you would see big picture as the role of caring for your people, your teams, especially that you've learned in this last year, and how you're thinking about that even a little differently going forward in the future? I'm sorry, went from really easy to like, okay, it's time for hard questions. Joe?
Yeah, I think about this from the role of, I think one of the hardest roles in any organization are people managers, right? Because, and this is something that I learned, kind of lately. I've taken on ProSci, change management. And one of the concepts there is that, as a people manager, you're in two different roles, right? So you go into the change. We are in the middle of change, long-term change. And then you're also expected to lead your team effectively. So as a people manager, you're playing like, a communicator role, a liaison, an advocate, sometimes resistance manager, and sometimes coach, right? So keeping that in mind, I think, and the idea that change is individual, right? And so every person goes through the process of going, and John talk about grief, right? We all go through our own timeline. And so I think as a supervisor manager, it's important to know that we ourselves are going through that change. And so modeling how we want our staff to be is very important. So for example, if I'm setting the messages, don't work on weekends or after hours, if you don't have to, we have to practice that ourselves, because I think our staff will see that. When you're saying, oh, don't work at 2 a.m. and a supervisor sending out an email at 2 a.m, I think there's a dissonance there. So I tell my son, hey, by the way, there's your son. What's Kimberly? Sorry, I got distracted, but so cute.
Sorry, that's not
No, that's cute.
Hey, buddy.
Just picking up coloring.
Yeah, that's cool. But I think mentoring and modeling the change you want to see and how your staff wants to be is a key thing. Second piece is about grace. I think as a supervisor, we do need to communicate the expectation to our customers, to our staff, to the higher ups. And I think that's one of the most important roles that we play as an advocate, is setting expectations, and that's part of the grace, is saying, what, we're going through the change ourselves, trauma and grief for our staff. So kind of back up a little bit, have some empathy. And this is what you can expect from us.
Yeah, can I build on that a little bit? Joe, I love that for so many reasons. And I think especially, I want to come back to this idea around, how we set the expectations. And for me, what I think is really interesting is I'm in this odd place where I serve on the executive leadership team because I am the chief equity officer. And so I have access to information that some of my team members have the ability to kind of hear a little bit more about than, let's say, maybe some of my other peers. And I have to be very thoughtful about that, especially right now in pandemic, where we have so many unknown variables and we are trying to make so many difficult decisions. So how I'm showing up in those conversations really matters. And so as I'm thinking about setting the expectations for my team, knowing that I see a lot of variability in terms of how leaders are supporting their teams and managing their teams, I'm constantly having us come back to this idea of like, so what is our why? What is our why now? And based upon now what we currently are experiencing, how can we support one another? My goal in really leading my team is continuing to provide agency within the entire team to support and uplift each other. I think my job is to constantly be sort of consistent. I need to be consistent in my presence. I need to be consistent in my affect. I need to be consistent in my decision making. And I need to constantly bring us back to our why, because otherwise, especially right now in pandemic, you can sometimes feel a certain sense of both listlessness and maybe even like purposelessness. There's sort of this sense of like, we know what we're supposed to be doing, but gosh, it's so hard to do that when there are so many other either converging crises or other issues that we are managing, even within our own personal space. So bringing everyone back to the why feels really, really important. And that's kind of at the team level. But then it's also about knowing your people, right? And so what one team member is really going to need as a result of where we are is totally different than someone else. And that's where those little micro check-ins and the ability to both stay vulnerable, be in your own vulnerability, but also acknowledge that this may land a little differently for some folks is really critical. And so that flexibility in really knowing your people and knowing how to support everyone's capacity is really important. I mean, we have one team member right now who is basically a full-time homeschooler, full-time, employee, and also trying to support other critical things in their family. And so I need to be very clear and very direct with the entire team that things are going to look different for that employee. And we need to actually demonstrate how we can have agency and support their work while they're trying to manage very different realities than some of us who, like for me, I've got a puppy, but a puppy is very different, right? Than homeschooling 2 kids. So that's kind of the approach that I've been taking. And it's been so far working pretty well.
I just want to jump off of, and Tricia, I love what you said about purpose. I think that's so important, especially now, just as a continual reminder, this is why we're doing this. I think that's so important. But to jump off of the micro check-in idea, I read this recently and I did a quick little Google search and couldn't find where I read it. But this idea that there's a difference between checking in and checking on those you supervise, and there's times for both, right? And sometimes you need to check on this specific task or project, but I think the ability as a supervisor to check in a normal, authentic, vulnerable, like you said, Tricia, way, I think that's an art for a supervisor to be able to do that well. And some of your employees or those you work with are going to need less check-ins. They're fine to work and they'll keep going. And then others, just a quick text or Slack message or whatever can be really important just to check in and let them know you're there and you're thinking about this or that. Those can be really important. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, just the kind of nuance and art of checking in and checking on.
I'll build on that. I really just appreciated everything, all the insights from Joe, Tricia, and John. I think more than ever, we're at a space where we need to meet people where they are. I recently, a new team came under me in the past year, and to build on John's idea, one employee in particular who we've had regular check-ins, and it really was very much an intentional, through, of course, a virtual connection point. But he shared with me recently that he's had he's had more meaningful opportunity to connect with me in the past 6 months than he had over several years under another supervisor. So just understanding even like having dedicated time with your supervisor or with your supervisees, and that it really can make a difference for how they feel about how their work is contributing in a meaningful way to the purpose of your organization. And I appreciated him sharing that with me. And I will also just say, but meeting people where they're at, I think more than ever, sort of how somebody's personal life shows up in the workspace, even as mine just did, he just walked through, is like bigger than ever, right? So I think really acknowledging and recognizing how people's individual situations influence how they show up at work is really key.
Can I just say one more thing? I was just thinking about this as you were saying that, Kimberly, in that specific example. To anyone who's watching this who might be an employee or a supervisee and not a supervisor, I would just say that it never hurts. If you feel like you need more check-in points or you need that weekly thing on the calendar to check in with your supervisor, I would say that 99% of supervisors would welcome that feedback, right? If you feel like you need more check-ins to go to your supervisor and say that, I think that's welcome feedback for a lot of supervisors.
Well, I think to acknowledge too that the skill of supervising and managing people isn't one just done through osmosis, that all of a sudden you absorb this new portfolio area and you, by default, you have those skills. Each of you, from equity, IT, communications, those are skills you had to develop over time. And so do a little bit of that self-audit to see maybe if it's time to do a little bit of a checkup, but also how we are redefining what supervision and management and just overall support of our teams look like right now is important. As we think about some self-awareness and auditing of higher ed as an industry, so let's remove our institutions and our position titles to not cause any friction there. I want to put higher ed on the hot seat a little bit. We know our industry is not perfect, and all industries had to pivot and problem solve beyond ways we couldn't imagine. But we also know before the pandemic, higher ed had some soft spots, let's say, and weaknesses in different components of the work that we do, but also as we recruit talent, we retain talent, and potentially how we continually lose really great people. And so if you were to give the field of higher ed a letter grade of handling workload and wellness for specifically campus staff this year, what would you give them and why? And those that are listening, feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know what your letter grade would be too. That will be fun. So who is ready with their grading rubric? I know this is a hard one. Are we pleading the fifth, everybody?
No, I know, right? I'm gonna jump in and at least kind of get us going. You know, I think we all can say, in terms of more broadly the industry, I want to give us to some extent an incomplete. Now, I will say this. If we had to just turn in grades right now, it's probably going to be anywhere between a C to a D. You haven't entirely failed. There's been a lot of important lessons learned, a lot of innovation, and some have done a tremendous job under unbelievable circumstance, and others have really struggled. But I would want to say incomplete because, again, both our industry and especially the field that we work in, the fields we work in, have really never had to experience this kind of sustained onslaught of crises day after day after day. And I just don't know how we could have performed much better when you've got so many both demands, stakeholders, and constraints. And so I think that's what I would say. I would probably say incomplete. I really want to see where we are a year from now, which this is also going to be a super weird year, but I want to see where we're going to be a year from now and have that kind of rear view give us more of a clearer understanding. But I also fully want to acknowledge that for so many, folks are exhausted. They aren't necessarily feeling well supported. And a lot of those hierarchies and structural inequities that have always existed within our institutions just only got amplified through the pandemic. And so for those who are listening or will listen, I think this is a critical conversation to be having this summer as we start to prepare for the upcoming year, is which voices and which roles, which experiences do we center as we think about what the 21-22 year looks like.
That's exactly where my mind went. Is we're really going to see how much we learned and how much the industry learned in these next few months and into the next year. I think a lot of institutions were forced into being more flexible, and a lot, I think, did an admirable job of that. But I'm really curious to see what institutions learned from that, as far as employee flexibility. And I just working in social media management, and I'm sure Kimberly's seen this as well, like the constant kind of joke within higher ed social media managers is that everyone at every campus complains about parking on social media, right? No matter like what campus you're on, like that's an issue, and every campus does it different. Some charge and some don't, but like letting employees work from home 2 days a week, like that could help your parking problem everywhere exponentially. It's environmentally way more friendly. We have a huge environmental issue here in the winter where pollution gets trapped in the mountain valleys. Like that's a major health concern and pollution issue. Just taking some cars off the road a couple days a week would be so helpful. A lot of people are having some helpful conversations about that, but man, I worry that we could just slide back into exactly how things were and don't learn from this. So I hope, I really hope that we can learn. And like Tricia said, I think we've got to do the best we can to champion some of those conversations, and also especially around diversity and equity. Man, it was easy for us to post a black square on Instagram accounts or put out an institutional statement. Here at BYU, I serve on our committee for race, equity, and belonging, and we've made some pretty substantial recommendations through a formal report. And now we're at the point where the institution has to accept or reject those recommendations. And I think it's things like that, right, where we've learned a lot. We've done, to Joe's point earlier, like we've kind of controlled what we've been able to control. And now all of a sudden we have some room to make some big decisions that are going to make some big impact moving forward. So incomplete would be my letter grade as well. Tricia, I thought you said that really well.
I would say the same thing. And I think, I responded to a tweet, I forgot who it was, and it said, what's changing in higher ed? And, it was about institutional changes. But the comment that I made was, for institutions, this revealed the relationship between staff and administration. For those institutions who treated their staff well, that would show up. For those, and vice versa, and the opposites too. So I think this pandemic really revealed and I think magnified, the good or the bad of an institution. And I think I am kind of curious as to what we learn and what sticks, a year, 2 years from now. And I can talk about it not just from the pandemic perspective, but from racial unrest, social injustice unrest. We've gone through, the murders and anti-Asian, violence. And so I would hope that a response to those, not just pandemic, but this crisis, it's not just a crisis management, but how much of that does that stick, as opposed to just like a one-time reaction, right? And so I think in higher ed, this is a critique that I think we're quick to tell other people to change. But as, going back to John says, like, ask someone to change their parking space. And there's a lot of resistance there. So, as higher ed, how much of the introspection are we going to do and say, what have you changed? even the exercise of like start, stop, continue. How many of those, how many institutions are going to go through that to say, what have we learned? What do we need to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? And what do we need to continue doing based on our experience the last year?
I'm interested to see how teaching and learning has been impacted since we've had to engage with our students from a virtual format. How can we evolve perhaps virtual course delivery over time? And I think there's going to be significant impacts on the academic side of the house of higher ed, and looking at how do students want to receive their education? Are there more opportunities for hybrid courses? Because I think, there's pros and cons to having synchronous or asynchronous classes, in person, virtual. And in order for higher ed as an industry to evolve to be provide customer service, right? So if students are our customers, how are we making sure that we're delivering a service to them that's valuable and worthy of their investment and of their time? And I hope that from this pandemic, we can really, really learn from what we were forced to do in offering a virtual education, but how we can still make it meaningful to students in the future.
Okay, so we got an average of incomplete. So we need to put together a summer improvement plan. We'll check back in. But also that relates with staff too, of improvement plans of what we need to focus on going forward. The topic for this panel was inspired a little bit by a tweet that I put out, and I've seen a number of these out there where I, in 1 week, saw 3 close colleagues in student affairs take roles in corporations who I could have seen all these individuals being very high impact leaders throughout different institutions. And I was bummed. It wasn't, really a challenge to the industry. It was more reflecting like, goodness, we're losing a lot of good people right now. And I think a few things are happening. Organizations and institutions are finally recruiting for positions because we held on to those for a long time because we didn't know what things were going to be going on. But we really do see, I think from student affairs and communications and academic affairs in between, people maybe have discovered this isn't the right place for me, right? Both in career decisions, but also maybe from some dynamics that are happening at their institutions. What can we think about as we think about that improvement plan for higher ed? What is it that we've got to improve on in order to recruit and retain and elevate, and not just keep where they are, but actually elevate high potential staff? And are you also seeing this potential like exodus, or are you seeing like a water break in a lot of good people leaving? And any concepts of how we might be able to patch that leak?
Patch the leak. I don't know what it is, Josie. Like the last statement or phrase that you present is always like boom. It's always interesting imagery, by the way. I'll once again just sort of get us started in this conversation because this is a tough one. We are losing so many good people. And I think it's a combination of what about the pandemic has brought for all of us kind of a moment of clarity in terms of what's important to us. And I think in recognizing what's important to us, I think for some who are making transitions out of higher education, again, how we treat our people is really critical. And if folks have not either felt appreciated or perhaps have not had the opportunity to create the kind of balance in their lives that they truly need, and that's become a real important value. Folks are looking for ways in which to kind of get things back into balance. And I will say higher education, and of course, especially student affairs, and especially student affairs in this year in pandemic, there was an over-reliance and under-appreciation of the critical work happening. And I think that this is exactly what we should anticipate when people start to align what they see as their value, and also whether or not that value is being reflected in their workplace. And so I am hoping, in terms of how we can patch the leak, again, what are we learning from this? And how do we begin to kind of right size the sort of balance that is required in our community, and especially this upcoming year? I'm actually planning to come into a conversation with our executive team next week to just throw it out there and say, we've never done this as a college sort of writ large, but I really think this summer we need to move to a 4-day work week over the summer and give people a chance to actually recoup all of that time they have put in and all of the stress that they've been going through, to come back into some balance before we come back in the fall. And I know there's a ton of work to be doing to get ready for the fall. And yet, if folks are burned and bruised, there's just no way that this is going to be a successful year. And we're going to continue to lose people in the middle of our stream. So I just think it's a wonderful time to pause and come back to what Joe was saying, this idea of, ways in which you start, stop, and continue. And I just want us to stop for a second and figure out how we can give people a little bit more balance, and assert that as an expectation. And I'll stop there, because I know I'm sure, John, Kimberly, Joe have some other really important things to share around that.
So I'll jump in here, and I really appreciate that, Tricia. I think you're spot on, just to stop, pause, reevaluate. And I think from my lens, from the digital comms space, it's understanding having decision makers and supervisors really understand the work that goes into roles. Because I think a lot of times high-level senior administrators, decision makers don't understand, or really just don't understand all of the hats that many staff members wear within their divisions on campus. And so if supervisors can work with their staffs to narrow down and set expectations and understand what are the roles and responsibilities for a certain individual, and then what are the resources that are needed to support that person, that team, and recognizing where are we falling short, because that's where we're falling short is where the problem is, and that's how we're getting burned and bruised, because there's still this expectation that all of these things need to happen from certain individuals, but not having the awareness or understanding that they are not set up for success in their current environment in which they are in. So it is an advocacy issue between, I think, supervisors and then senior leadership to help support their team, so that we don't have really talented folks moving on into perhaps corporate, where they could have more resources, teams, that type of thing.
I think I go back to, and thank you, I'm building on what Kimberly and Tricia already said. I go back to what my vice chancellor, my supervisor, said to me, to a student a couple weeks ago, said, because the student says, how do you find the balance between the work that you do as administrator and connecting with the students? And my vice chancellor said, at the end of the day, it's your one-on-one conversations that's really going to matter. Because how would you know how you act upon as administrator if you don't talk to folks that you serve? And so in that context, it was your one-on-one conversation with students. And I think this would also apply to your one-on-ones with the staff. Because again, with that, I like the idea of organizational change happens at individual level collectively, right? And I think if we forget to bring people along, again, they have agency and they have great ideas. They're the ones that are in the front line. And so if we don't listen, if we don't get them to the process and the change that we want to pursue, I think there's going to be a big loss there. So I think to me, it's all about the process is the outcome. I believe in that. So if certain folks are the only ones making a decision, you're going to get the same decision. So how do we then get folks who are normally marginalized, who are not part of the conversation? This is our time to say, how can we do this in a different way? How can we do this in terms of a way that's more inclusive, more equitable, and all the things we want to be, the ideal state that we want to be?
This has been a really interesting conversation. What I'm pulling out of this as a major solution is empathy, like leadership empathy, and I'll tell you how I got to this just listening to the three of you. I wasn't aware before this conversation that this mass exodus or leak is happening outside of higher ed communications. I didn't know that this was something happening in student affairs as well. What we're seeing in communications, especially among social media managers, is a burnout and exodus there. I'm not sure that I'm seeing it as much among like a media relations professional or graphic designer or something. I've really seen it in social media, and I think there's a huge element of burnout there, what Kimberly said, wearing multiple hats. And the thing that I've always thought about with this is that it's really hard for social media managers because I think a lot of them have leadership, to Kimberly's point, who have no idea how hard it is what they're doing because they haven't been there before, right? Like we're just not at a point time-wise, logistically, to have someone who's a associate vice president or something who has done social media management, right? Like social media managers just aren't old enough to get there yet. Social media hasn't been invented long enough. But as I listen to what you're saying, Joe and Tricia, I wonder if that's kind of a common component among a lot of younger professionals in higher ed right now, whether it's issues of diversity and equity that they hold closely, that they're not seeing their leadership value or whatever it might be. I wonder if there's a generation gap, an age gap where a level of empathy needs to happen from leadership to be able to truly try to put yourself in those shoes and understand a unique workforce that generationally is just a little bit different here and needs and has some different values. I think along the lines of a lot of the things we've talked about today, work-life balance and how a lot of these things work. But yeah, it's hard. There's some challenges there, but I think it takes a unique level of empathy for leadership to understand where these employees are and how to move forward.
Hey, Josie, can I one last comment from me? I think I also want to give grace to our senior administrators. I mean, I can speak about my vice chancellor here at UCSB. She's dealing with so much things, and I have the privilege of having my one-on-one conversations with her. And the things that she must deal with every single day. I mean, she's not just a one single issue, right? I mean, she's always dealing with something, that's so many multidimensional. So I think part of it, for some administrators is, missing the point about connecting with staff. At the same time, I know, again, I can speak from my experience with my vice chancellor that they're dealing with so many things as well, at every level. And having to respond. And as Tricia said, there's so many variability. There's so many things that are happening at that level that we don't even know about. But yet they have to keep to themselves to be able to say, how do I frame this? So they themselves were going through the change. So again, I can only speak for my vice chancellor, but I think giving her grace to say that she's also dealing with so many things, not just professional work, but also maybe in personal stuff at the same time. So.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing, Josie, because I think that this question it's going to continue to build upon, we're going to build upon each other's thoughts, especially because of one other critical thing, which is I think that there are a lot of administrators who are having conversations about what has changed for students as a result of the pandemic, but not as many conversations are happening around what has changed in the lives and the experiences of staff and faculty. We've got to figure out how we get them having that conversation in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. Well, empathy, education, both directions of the spectrum. But I gotta squeeze this question in about the fall and forecasting, and we gotta put on our SPF. We gotta prevent fires from happening. But let's also acknowledge that there's a lot of pressure being put on the fall. Even this summer, we're talking about we need to think, we need to stop, we need to do all these things. Some people have said we're going to have 2 freshman class, or this last year was redshirt freshmen, or, all these new staff now are filling positions that were open, or faculty teaching in different modalities. So just in 30 seconds, what do you want to remind yourself of if you were to watch this again in August or September? to keep in mind what we've learned, that when it gets crazy again in the fall, what we need to ground ourselves back into.
Maybe this is a little too Pollyanna-ish, but I want to remember how hard this was, and I want to value what we can get back. Like, I don't want to take for granted what comes back. I think my 30-second or less thing is that, to really value the things that we get back and not to take advantage of them.
I would just absolutely, and I would say, based upon what we know that everyone values, let's build in support around what it is, the goals that we're trying to accomplish. So, as a sector, as institutions, in our departments and divisions, as we establish what those goals are, determine what is needed to really move toward those goals. I think that is really critical. How do we support our teams in getting there?
Joe?
I'd say action speaks louder than words. So all these promises, all these things that the institution will say we'll do, I think is not going to matter until we actually see the changes. Not talking about institutional changes. It's got to be transformative. This is such a big pandemic. This is such a big experience that I think we have to celebrate the individual accomplishments. We have to acknowledge that, but we have to transform the institutions.
And I would say a commitment back to understanding our why, as Tricia talked about earlier, and our purpose. And then how can we engage our teams and our staffs to make their work meaningful, in a way to live out our purpose and our various roles.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to each of our panelists. This hour has flown by as I put you all on the hot seat. A little bit about, though, how we can rebuild and heal over the summer going into the fall. Thank you so much for joining me today, and those that have tuned in live or catching the recording. I hope this was helpful. Again, feel free to jump into the chat. Let us know your reactions, your questions. We'll be taking a break for a couple months. And of course, we will be back in the fall to continue to support and educate and advocate for you. So I hope you are finding some time to rest and to rebuild. Thank you again to my panelists, and we'll see y'all soon.